So a few days ago now, I asked you guys to send me the things that still confuse you the most about the Aether storyline, and that I would go through and try to give detailed and thorough answers to each of them in a video. This is that video. But before we get into the questions, seeing as this is our first video, I just wanted to say welcome to the channel. We of course have the Twitter and now the TikTok, but this channel on YouTube has been a long time coming for me, and I hope to be able to use it to better explain concepts and be able to get across the more complex ideas that really aren't that suited for those other platforms. Anyway, with all that said, we're going to go ahead and get into the video itself, but as always, thank you for watching. For our first question, we have Spook, who asked, what's with Porter dying in two different ways? This is in reference to the fact that despite us hearing Porter hanging himself in a radio from Darice due to him not being able to find his cyanide capsules, in the timeline it still says that he simply died from his cyanide. Normally, I would just say that this is a simple retcon. However, due to the sheer amount of things that point towards the former being true, such as the radio itself, a quote from Group 935's field journal, and in the Black Ops 1 campaign terminal, MJ12 makes note of the radio, also stating that the man appears to hung himself. All of this leading me to believe that the timeline entry is just a simple mistake, and that Porter hanging himself is still canon. Next up we have Ferris, who asked, if Tag is post-cycle, how does Pablo go into the Great War and make Richtofen show up in Blood of the Dead? And to answer the Tag part first, Pablo solves this paradox by not time traveling like it might seem at first, but rather actually using the Agarthan device to rewrite history itself. He does this by going back to the Great War, becoming Sir Pablo Marinus, befriending Richtofen, and forcing him to reconcile the fact that Primus' journey is ultimately the cause of untold misery for the normal people of the multiverse who are also trapped in this endless cycle. The two of them eventually come across an ancient teleporter, and Pablo sacrifices himself so that Richtofen can be sent forward in time, cryogenically freeze himself in the lab, and await the day that the cycle can finally be broken. Hakeem asked, where did Peter go after Alpha Omega? The answer here is that we unfortunately just don't know. We never find out. Right before he flies away, he mentions that he has unfinished business, but that would be the last time we ever see him in the Aether storyline. What we do know, however, is that just like everybody else, he eventually ended up in the Dark Aether, as evident by one of the ethereal memory orbs mentioned in Cold War Zombies intel. Up next, we have Swagmate, who wants to know which versions of Noct and Verrucht are canon. The answer here being that they all are. The ones with the American soldiers being the one which we see in the original World at War versions of events in Dimension 1, and the ones with Ultimus most commonly being regarded as different versions of the cycle that we're seeing play out. Next up we have Phoenix McLean, who asked, if Tagger Totem takes place on our planet, how does that affect Call of the Dead? Did the cast of the movie recreate the look on Earth, or did they travel across the universe just to shoot a movie? Here we have a little bit of a misconception, as Tagger Totem does not take place on our planet, but rather in a pocket dimension that is a mere copy of the real outpost on Earth. There is, however, evidence from radios and the map itself that a portal to Tag and its pocket dimension can be found within the moon of Mars Phobos. Raphael Lima asked, what's the point of collecting our characters' souls in Black Ops 3? Is it really because Monty would be able to watch them? Why at those specific moments throughout space and time? The real reason that Monty wants our characters' souls, and ultimately why he turns them into children, is so that they wouldn't be able to continue screwing up the multiverse, and so that he'd be able to keep a close eye on them in Agartha. Just as Primus Richtofen says in Tagger Totem, Monty is simply trying to save the multiverse in the safest way he knows how. Nigel asked, who controls the zombies in Cold War? The Forsaken? The answer to this question is quite simple, as yes, it is the Forsaken, as he's the one in control of most of the Dark Aether in Cold War Zombies. 99% Schizophrenic has 4 questions. He asked, what's the real importance of Weasel in Mob of the Dead? What happened to the Mob of the Dead crew after Blood of the Dead? After what we saw on Vanguard Zombies, is the Chaos storyline now canon to the Dark Aether storyline? And finally, is Victus still alive? And to answer these in order, the importance of the Weasel in Mob is that he was the one that formulated the plan to escape the island. His death is ultimately the thing that sets in motion the formation of the pocket dimension itself, as the 3 inmates that murdered him would be soon executed via electric chair. The Weasel is also imperative to breaking the cycle, but we'll get into how that is in a later question. Moving on to his second question, after events of Blood of the Dead, the souls of the mob crew and everyone else on the island, including the zombies, are freed back into the Aether. For this next question, we really don't have an answer as of yet, but I'm leaning pretty heavily towards them going the route of keeping Chaos itself non-canon while still reincorporating elements of it into the Dark Aether storyline. Some evidence for this is that Kraft says that Alistair was an amateur demonologist, which is a far cry from his world-renowned status in the Chaos storyline. And to answer 99% Schizophrenic's final question, no, Victus are dead. Evidence for this includes the Forsakens telling us that no human being in the Dark Aether had ever lived long enough to climb the ranks like he did, and Treyarch themselves outright telling us that Tag was narratively the end of the line for them. Alexis Romero asked, did the Dark Aether entities exist prior to the Dark Aether storyline, or were they only created after the end of Tagter Toten and the multiverse collapsed into the Dark Aether? The answer to this one is that the Dark Aether entities have actually existed well before the conclusion of the Aether storyline. In Vanguard Zombies Intel, Syraxis actually talks to the fact that prior to the events of Tagter Toten, that they had no idea of a place existing separate from the Dark Aether. Control asked, how is the Avogadro in transit in the original timeline if he is sent only to the transit site due to the actions of Ultimus/Primus in the Broken Cycle? This is actually a pretty common misconception with Alpha Omega. When we send Pernell to the Hamfer site at the end of Alpha Omega, that is not how the Avogadro that we see in transit ended up there. But rather, a few months prior to Primus and Ultimus' arrival in Camp Edward, then Broken Arrow employee Rustman and Barkley arrived on scene, collected a sample from Pernell, and then teleported that sample to Hanford, where the scientists there used the sample to create the Avogadro we see in transit, which is notably weaker. This is all occurring within the cycle. Raya Anon says, I simply don't understand why they need little kid versions of themselves. This is again, like I said earlier in the video, Monty only does this because he wants our crew to be in a state of which they won't be able to further fuck up the multiverse. Buff the Top 63 asked, is the Revelation Skybox the Dark Aether? The answer here is partly yes. Revelations itself wholly takes place within Agartha, but the Skybox displays the clashing colors of blue and red. This is meant to portray the energies of the Aether and the Dark Aether clashing, with the red obviously being that of the Dark Aether itself. Mr. L asked, so is Dr. Schuster dead or is his fate simply left unknown? And what did Ultimus Will Prevail mean? The last thing we ever hear from Schuster is whenever he confronts Dr. Lehman, whom then moments later unleashes a zombie outbreak at the Pentagon. It's never made apparent whether or not Schuster survived the outbreak, but he definitely would have eventually died after the banishment to the Dark Aether after Tagter Toten, just like everybody else. And to answer his second question, we never get a definitive answer to what Ultimus Will Prevail means, but in my opinion, it likely refers to Ultimus Richthofen, who in the end fulfilled his goal of ending the cycle, and whose legacy is now continued via Eddie in the Dark Aether storyline. Harv asked, what causes the Mob of the Dead cycle to break? The thing that causes the mob cycle to break is the Weasel finally killing the other mobsters. While at first glance it might seem a little strange as to why that causes it to break, however it all makes sense once you consider the fact that the mob cycle was made to break. Its creator, the Shadow Man, meant for the pocket dimension to serve as a trap for Richthofen, and thus the cycle breaking is the catalyst for that. So whenever the Weasel finally kills the others, that is when the events of blood take place. Undead 115 asked, who is Saburo Masaki? Considering that this name appears on the Path of Sorrows, which is Takio's katana, it is almost a certainty that this is the ancestor for whom the sword was originally made for, and over the generations it would have been passed down to Takio himself. Dale Bridger asked 3 questions. He wants to know, did Monty and the Shadow Man know about court effects and the Dark Aether in general? Did Nikolai know that collapsing the multiverse wouldn't fix everything? And finally, what happened to the souls of Dempsey and Takio after Tagter Toten? To start off, Monty and the Shadow Man both knew about the Dark Aether. However, the only one of them that has the possibility to have known about court effects would have been the Shadow Man and the Apophicans. The reason that I say Monty most likely wouldn't have known about him is that to the Keepers, interacting with the Dark Aether in any way, shape, or form was extremely taboo and off limits. Moving on to his second question, Nikolai wouldn't have known that what they did wouldn't have fixed everything in regards to the zombies. However, what he absolutely did know is that by ending the cycle, they have stopped the suffering of an infinite amount of living creatures throughout the multiverse, and had actually given the New World a real fighting chance, whereas they really didn't have one in what came before. And to answer his last question, Dempsey and Takio's souls would have faded alongside everybody else's at the end of Tagter Toten when the Aether was destroyed, and that's if they weren't already gone whenever the summoning key initially exploded. Nuke 12 asked, do the zombies actually come in waves or rounds? Are the power-ups and gums / elixirs actually things they use, or just game mechanics? Is there a reason that the Black Ops 1 versions of World at War and Zombies Chronicle maps are different, like having Wonder Fizz and new perks and weapons? Largely all the things mentioned here are just gameplay mechanics, and have no bearing on the lore. But, however, things such as the gums and elixirs do have in-canon explanations, such as Monty creating the gums. But as I said, for the most part, this is for gameplay reasons. September C asked, in Alpha Omega, what is happening in the rest of the world, / more specifically, the US government? And to answer this, basically the world would still be reeling from the events of the Black Ops 2 campaign. But besides from that, I'll put up some stuff that was going on in that general time era on screen now. All of these images are from Call of Ducky over on Twitter. He's a pretty cool guy and also talks about COD lore. You should go follow him. PGV asked, do you think something happened in the Dark Aether to make the Vodenoid leave in 2021? Something definitely happened, that's for certain. But it might not have been on the Dark Aether side of things. Not necessarily, at least. The only thing that really needs to happen in order for this to become a possibility is something needs to happen that perforates the dimensional veil between our world and the Dark Aether again. In Cold War Zombies, this of course was done via Valentina restarting the cyclotron in Die Maschine, which then was the sole event that made it possible for all the outbreaks we see, be it in round-based outbreak or in Onslaught. So yeah, the only necessity here is that something needs to weaken the veil once more, which will undoubtedly happen in the next game, regardless. Unbate wants to know why some objects in the Aether storyline have the name of Real, and that's a really good question. And to answer it, we're going to need to first start by giving a little bit of context, because ever since Black Ops 3, there's been this sentiment in the community that the more cosmic elements of the Aether storyline kind of just came out of nowhere, but really that's not the case, because if we go back to the roots of the zombie storyline in Darice, we can see that the Keepers and the Apothicons actually originate from something in that map, which would be the Vril. And the Vril, or the Vril Yaw, as they're called in any other piece of media or conspiracy, originates from the book The Coming Race, in which they are a race of alien beings that first settle on Mars and then eventually come to Earth, and they live underground in a city called Agartha, which houses the Black Sun. And this is actually how they're first referenced in the Aether storyline, because on the Darice chalkboards we can see the words in either French or German, I can't remember which, Swan Swartz, I think, don't quote me on that, but it translates to Black Sun, and that's their first real reference to in the Aether storyline. They are then featured pretty heavily throughout Black Ops 1, be it the Vril Rod. In Call of the Dead you get the Morse code that blinks the Vril, and in Moon we literally interact with what Richtofen calls an ancient Vril device, which is the MPD. And the thing there is that we later learn that the MPD was created by the Apothicons. Now the Vril aren't mentioned pretty much at all in Black Ops 2, but then they return as the Keepers and Apothicons in Black Ops 3. Now the reason that they get their name changed from Vril to the Keepers and Apothicons is because Treyarch wanted to break away from the negative connotations that come from the Vril, specifically how the Nazis really adopted that in World War II. Now, one thing to really keep in mind about the Vril, and in the context of the Aether storyline, is that the Keepers and Apothicons are not literally the Vril. That's something I really struggled with whenever I was first coming in and learning this. But rather, that Group 935 is simply referring to them, these alien forces, as the Vril, because that's one of the only things they really know to compare them to, or that they have to compare them to. So yeah, I think that's a pretty good summary on that question. Alright, for these next two questions, I'm just going to put them together because they're really similar, and they want to know what are the connections to campaign between zombies and the campaign, specifically in Black Ops 1, but we'll go a little bit deeper in that, or try to at least. I've got a list of them here, and I'll go ahead and put them up on screen as we go along. So first up, and probably one of the biggest ones, especially in Black Ops 1, the Darice Massacre, which Kravchenko's cousin was involved in, who went on to form Gorky Korolev Medical, which is a big-ish part of the campaign, as they are how Dragovich smuggles sleeper agents and Nova 6 across countries and into the United States for Project Nova. Next up we have the Ascension Group, which is featured in both campaign and zombies already, but in campaign, through the Terminal, they are said to be a coalition between the Soviet government, who co-opted a bunch of Group 935 scientists and Wonderwolf program scientists and dragged their asses back to Russia to work for them in developing weapons and such. And this group is led by Dragovich, Gersh, Harveyina, and Steiner. This actually goes back into what I was talking about, the Darice Massacre, which is where a lot of these scientists would have been co-opted by the Russians during a precursor of sorts to Ovasakim, which is the Russian equivalent to Operation Paperclip. Next up, also in Black Ops 1, we have the MJ-12 going over the events of Verrucht and a bunch of limericks that John Banana, one of the soldiers at Verrucht, wrote as he was dying. And we also have them going over a bunch of excerpts from Dr. Max's data servant, which is also a precursor to the internet and the Black Ops 1 terminal in general. But I made a TikTok about that, you can go watch it. The John Banana limericks, by the way, were also, as a further connection, in the Black Ops 3 timeline that was released around the time of Chronicles, actually makes reference to them, which adds a little bit of a further connection to campaign, be it to the terminal itself. In Gorod Krovi, we get a quote from Viktor Reznov that says, "Vengeance is mine." And you can also maybe go the extra step and say that possibly, in the context of the statement, you could connect it to a soldier who actually, a Russian soldier who went behind enemy lines and stole a bunch of Group 935 research to give back to the Russians, who then developed their own robots and shit. And all that about the soldier comes from a cipher in the map, but really that's theory territory, nothing confirmed there. And then finally, or at least finally on my list here, there's probably more, I'm just not remembering at the time. We of course have Wood's 115 tattoo, which appears in Black Ops 1, 2, and in Cold War, seeing as the Aether storyline ended and the Aether itself is no more, his tattoo is actually gone off his third person model, or texture. Oh yeah, and I just forgot the classified PAP camos, which are the Black Ops 1 campaign intels, specifically the ones that mention GKM and the profiles of Hudson and Woods, I believe. There might be more, but that's just what I remember. Moving on, we have our, I believe, second to last question for the Q&A, and it comes from Dr. M, who wants to know about that goddamn Noct loading screen and the alternate Darice loading screen. And to preface this, I'm just going to say there are no definitive answers here. So, yeah. But what we do have are some theories, one way more schizophrenic than the other, so let's go ahead and get into that one first, and that would be for the Noct loading screen. The Black Ops 1 loading screen for Noct depicts a man time traveling from the year 1964 all the way back to 1943 during World War II. And it features a lot of Cold War era iconography, such as the old style computers, scientists, and even Soviet era Vietnam stuff. Now the reason that campaign sort of vibe is important here is that the Black Ops 1 campaign and Black Ops in general really focuses around the CIA. And the reason that's important for this theory is that this theory proposes that this man on the loading screen is none other than Samuel Stuhlinger. And the real crux of this here is that on multiple occasions now, once back when Black Ops 2 first released and once more recently in 2021 I believe, the voice actor for Samuel Stuhlinger has said that his character is that of a CIA agent. Now this proposal is batshit insane, frankly, but let's dig a little deeper into his theory. Now to use this as a little bit of a jumping off point, looking back at the loading screen we see the man time traveling, of course. Now, something we know about time travel in the Aether storyline is that the more you do it, the more ethereal energy is built up in your bloodstream, making your blood more powerful. Keeping that in mind, now let's head over to another Black Ops 1 Zombies map, Call of the Dead, where we might find some more potential evidence for this theory. In Call of the Dead, we have one weapon called the VR-11, which is another thing we have pretty much zero lore for. Now, what's interesting about the VR-11 is its ammo is a vial of a suspicious liquid, potentially even blood. It also has a peculiar looking stone in the center of the weapon. The function of the weapon itself is to turn zombies back into humans, specifically one human, a clone if you will, of a 1960s CIA man. Now, like I said, we don't have any lore for this weapon, not officially anyway. We don't know where it came from. However, there is something to note on the side of it. The number is 87, which back in the day, a lot of us attributed that to Building 87, mentioned in GK Nova 6. We then also had the number 87 on the wave gun for Moon, which then also made an appearance in Zombies Labs for the Moon trailer, which appeared to be an American facility. So we all had it in our minds that the VR-11 was American made. This itself got debunked whenever in the timeline the wave gun was revealed to be made by Gersh, Group 935, instead of what we thought. However, that little stone potentially does tie back to the Americans, specifically Broken Arrow. You see, in Alpha Omega,
we learned that the only way that you can really bring someone back is through the Genesis code, which is what Maxis was trying to find. Broken Arrow replicated this by using the elemental shard to revive Peter McCain. And what are we seeing with the VR11 if not just that? A false elemental shard, if you will, the stone itself. Really just making the gun a Genesis code gun, turning people back into humans. Specifically, that one clone of a CIA agent who, if you subscribe to his theory, may just be a clone of Samuel Stillinger from when he was younger and time traveling for the CIA. Again, just a theory, just food for thought. Alright, now that we spent way too much time on that portion of the question, let's move on to the second part, the alternate die-rise loading screen, which depicts Primus plus Ultimus Richtofen rowing up to the house in Agartha to face down Monty. Now, a lot of people attribute this to something that got cut from the story that we were supposed to be. That's where we were heading. We were heading to fight Monty in Agartha. But really, realistically, if you look at that, Monty literally would have just snapped them back to the Great War like it was nothing. Like, that's the entire point of Black Ops 4. They're trying to avoid Monty and carry out their own plan. Now, personally, I've always viewed this as the truth that Richtofen could not bear. That they could not have done that. It always had to end with them dying and the Aether being destroyed, because there's no way in hell they would be able to face down Monty like that, who, quite frankly, is a demigod capable being. And moving on to our final question, the Q&A, Baba asked, why couldn't Primus/Ultimus build the Agarthan device without the help of Victus? And ultimately the answer here is twofold, in that they could not risk Monty finding them, and the Aether itself would not let them do such a thing, as it has its own sort of sentience to it. It knows it must keep them alive in order to continue its own existence. But this isn't to say that they have not tried in the past, as we see evidence for in Revelations and then continued in Classified, a Dempsey cipher in which shit has gone horribly bad. Dempsey hopes that the others are awakened, that being Victus, and that he will be joining theirs soon in death and repeating the cycle. This all leading to the final iteration where Primus and Ultimus decide to hide in a place where Monty will not look for them in the forest, which we now know is most likely in the Dark Aether, while Victus goes off and does the tag quest on their own, building the Agarthan device and helping Ultimus and Primus. And the reason that they do it really falls down to like the importance of Victus, and that is they're important because they're unimportant. They're the regular people of the story, the regular folks of the multiverse. They represent the normal denizens of the multiverse. Monty's so busy looking for Primus and Ultimus that if he were to row up there, he'd pretty much just be like, who the fuck are these people? And not really pay it any mind, most likely. And thus, the most unimportant people do the most important thing and end the suffering of everyone. And that is our last question for the Q&A. I hope y'all enjoyed watching. This video was actually meant to be out last week, but that didn't happen due to unforeseen circumstances. We, of course, have the backlog I tweeted a few weeks ago of all the videos I have that I want to make currently. I'll put that up on screen now. Y'all will be receiving those in the near future, some point, whenever they're ready. So, yeah, bye.